The sun baked the rolling hills of Kentucky as Giuseppe Moretti shielded his eyes against its glare. Before him stretched an ocean of wheat, golden waves undulating with each breeze, disappearing into the horizon farther than his vision could reach. The rumble began as a distant thunder, growing steadily until the earth seemed to vibrate beneath his boots. Over the crest of the nearest hill appeared a line of mechanical beasts, each larger than any farm machine he had ever witnessed in his native Tuscany. 23 tractors, massive steel titans with wheels taller than a man, advanced in formation across the field, harvesting more grain in a single hour than his father's entire village could gather in a week. Giuseppe stood frozen, mouth slightly agape, as the American guard beside him chuckled. "First time seeing a proper harvest, eh?" the guard said, lighting a cigarette with casual indifference. "This ain't even the main operation."
Just old Henderson's middle field. Giuseppe couldn't form words. He had been captured in North Africa 9 months earlier, surviving the scorching desert, the chaotic naval transport across the Atlantic, and the processing at Camp Ellis. Throughout it all, he had clung to the conviction that Italy, despite its setbacks, remained superior in the things that mattered: culture, agriculture, the sacred connection between man and soil. Il Duce himself had proclaimed it. Yet here, on an ordinary Tuesday in the American heartland, that belief crumbled like parched earth. The tractors continued their mechanical march, devouring acre after acre with industrial precision. "How many?" he finally whispered, the question directed at no one in particular, perhaps at the universe itself. "How many of these machines does America have?" The guard shrugged, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Couldn't say exactly. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. Every decent-sized farm has at least a couple. Some operations run dozens." That night in the barracks, Giuseppe stared at the ceiling, the drone of those engines still echoing in his mind. Around him, other Italian prisoners played cards or wrote letters home, but he remained silent, troubled by what he had witnessed. How could he explain to his father, who still plowed with a single mule, that America produced more steel in a month than Italy manufactured in a year? What would his village priest say to the knowledge that a single American county harvested more wheat than entire Italian provinces? What had they been fighting for if this was the enemy they faced? Not a decadent, weak society as propaganda had claimed, but an industrial colossus that made Italy's much-vaunted agricultural prowess seem like a child's garden by comparison. The tractors were just the beginning, Giuseppe realized, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Behind those machines lay factories and fuel refineries, steel mills and transportation networks, an entire world of abundance that Il Duce's H's had never acknowledged. Had all of Italy been fighting a war it could never hope to win? And what else about America would shake the foundations of everything he had been taught to believe? The morning light filtered through the barracks windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Giuseppe Moretti sat on the edge of his bunk, turning the strange object in his hands. It was nothing special, just a pair of work boots issued by the camp quartermaster. Yet they symbolized everything that had begun to unsettle him. The leather was thick but supple, the soles rubber rather than wood, the stitching machine-precise in a way no village cobbler could match. In Italy, such boots would be reserved for wealthy landowners or party officials. Here, they were standard issue for prisoners of war. "Admiring American craftsmanship?" Captain Ritchie's voice dripped with sarcasm from the neighboring bunk. The officer had been captured at El Alamein and still maintained rigid military bearing despite months in captivity. "Don't be fooled by their trinkets, Moretti. Remember what the fascist youth handbook says about material goods. They're hollow achievements compared to the spiritual strength of—" "I've read the handbook," Giuseppe interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "But these aren't trinkets, Captain. They're work boots,
Better than any I've ever owned. And yesterday I saw tractors, dozens of them on a single farm, while my father still breaks his back behind a plow. Richie's eyes narrowed. Watch yourself, Private. Defeatist talk is still treason, even behind wire. The captain's warning hung in the air as the prisoners filed out for breakfast. Giuseppe walked solidly through the morning mist toward the mess hall, the boots making almost no sound on the gravel path. Around him, the camp was stirring to life, guards changing shifts, kitchen smoke rising, the American flag being raised with mechanical precision. The prisoners had expected hardship upon capture. Tales of starvation and abuse had circulated through Italian ranks. Instead, they found themselves in a strange limbo of relative comfort and mounting confusion. The mess hall doors swung open, releasing the aroma of coffee and toast. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute that had become standard even for officers back home. Real bread, white and soft, not the coarse gray loaves that Italian civilians now fought over in ration lines. Giuseppe took his place in the queue, tray extended, as American cooks heaped portions onto metal plates. "Eggs today," announced a heavy-set cook with a mustache, scooping yellow mounds onto each tray. "Side of ham." "Coffee's fresh." Behind Giuseppe, Private Luca Bianchi whistled softly. "Eggs? My mother hasn't seen an egg in Milano for 8 months. She wrote that chickens have become more valuable than jewelry." "The Americans probably have mechanical chickens, too," joked another prisoner, though his laughter seemed forced. "Factory-made eggs, produced by the thousand." Giuseppe found no humor in it. As he sat with his breakfast, he calculated that this single meal contained more protein than his family likely consumed in a week. The realization settled like a stone in his stomach. It wasn't just tractors or boots, it was everything. Every corner of American life revealed an abundance that made Italy's claims of agricultural supremacy seem like a child's fantasy. Through the mess hall windows, he watched as supply trucks rolled into camp. More food, more materials, more of everything. The vehicles themselves told another story. Sturdy, uniform, mass-produced.
Nell'armia armata, trasporto era un hodgepodge di requisizionati civili veicoli, often breaking down per lacco di spare parts. Qui, identici trucks arrivavano con clockwork regolarità, le rengine hummando con well-oiled confidence. Una memoria surfasse dai suoi tempi di training in Napoli, un ufficiale addressando nuovi recluiti. America è un paper tiger, wealthy per fatto, ma soft, without spirit, without discipline. Dei non podono indure hardship come gli italiani hanno tra tutta la nostra glorious history. Those words now echoed with hollow irony. If America era un paper tiger, era uno con steel claws e un endless appetite. La questione che aveva cominciato con those tractors now expanded. Se avevano been so wrong about America's weakness, cos'altre linsi avevano vovona antoninate nella fabbrica di fascista truth?
The answer awaited beyond the mess hall, across fields that would reveal not just the scale of American farming, but the fundamental nature of the conflict that had brought him across an ocean in chains. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight as Giuseppe and 50 other prisoners climbed onto trucks bound for work detail. The vehicles bounced along country roads, past forests and streams that reminded him painfully of Tuscany. Through the canvas flaps, he caught glimpses of a landscape in full productivity, not just wheat fields, but orchards heavy with fruit, pastures dotted with fat cattle, and everywhere the omnipresent mechanical servants, tractors, harvesters, and machines whose purpose he couldn't even guess. The trucks slowed as they approached a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounded by silos tall as church steeples. A grain cooperative, the guard explained, where farmers pooled resources for storage and distribution.
As they disembarked, Giuseppe felt a peculiar sensation, a vibration through the soles of his American-made boots. The earth itself seemed to hum with electrical energy. Inside the main building, the reason became clear. Enormous motors drove conveyor belts that sorted, cleaned, and directed grain with minimal human intervention. The noise was deafening, not the organic chaos of an Italian marketplace, but the rhythmic, mechanical symphony of industrial efficiency. The prisoners were assigned to load sacks onto waiting trucks, but Giuseppe found himself distracted by the scale of the operation. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to an older American in overalls, not a guard, but a facility manager named Thompson, who spoke with surprising gentleness. "We'll process about 3,000 tons through here today. Before the war, it was mostly for domestic use. Now, much of it ships to your Europe." 3,000 tons, Giuseppe repeated, the number incomprehensible. In one day?
From just this area? Just this county, Thompson corrected, a hint of pride creeping into his tone. There are operations like this all across the Midwest. Kansas alone produces enough wheat to feed half of Italy. The manager moved on, but his words lingered like the grain dust floating in shafts of sunlight. Half of Italy, from one American state. The thought was simultaneously overwhelming and humiliating. "They're showing off," muttered Sergeant Donati, a hardened soldier who had fought from Ethiopia to Libya. "Psychological warfare. Make us feel small." "No," Giuseppe replied, watching the endless river of grain. "They're not showing off. This is simply how they operate. They built all this before we ever arrived." As the day wore on, the prisoners witnessed more of the operation. A fleet of trucks arrived from surrounding farms, disgorging golden torrents into collection bins. Mechanical arms swung enormous sacks with effortless precision. Adding to the marvel, many of the workers were women, operating machinery with casual competence while men fought overseas. During a water break, Giuseppe noticed a bulletin board covered with mechanical diagrams and production figures. Though his English was limited, the numbers needed no translation. They told a story of agricultural might beyond anything Italian propaganda had ever acknowledged. One chart comparing yearly outputs brought a flush of shame to his cheeks. The smallest American farming region outproduced Italy's most fertile valley. "You know what's really something?" said the American guard, noticing Giuseppe's interest in the charts. "Most of these farms are running at half capacity. Labor shortage with the boys overseas. Before the war, output was nearly double." Half capacity. The words echoed with terrifying implications. Italy had mobilized everything, every resource, every able body, every scrap of propaganda for the war effort. America, it seemed, was fighting with one hand casually tied behind its back. As they loaded the last trucks for the day, a strange sound cut through the mechanical drone. A radio playing American jazz, its syncopated rhythms seeming to mock the rigid marching songs that had accompanied Giuseppe's military training. A female worker swayed slightly as she operated a control panel, humming along as if at a dance hall rather than a strategic agricultural facility. Giuseppe wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dust across his forehead. The tractors had been shocking enough, but this casual display of industrial might, operated partly by women while maintaining production levels that dwarfed his homeland's best efforts, penetrated deeper. It wasn't just America's machines that defied Italian propaganda. It was the entire system, the scale, the seeming effortlessness of it all. On the truck ride back to camp, Giuseppe closed his eyes, but the images remained. Silos towering like cathedrals to grain, conveyor belts snaking through buildings, and the endless mechanical heartbeat of a nation that produced so much that its prisoners ate better than civilians back home. Somewhere between those wheat fields and the camp's barbed wire, another piece of his certainty crumbled away, leaving him to wonder what revelation tomorrow would bring, and how much of his former beliefs would remain standing when the sun again set over this land of mechanical abundance. "We Italians," Captain Ricci declared one evening in the barracks, his voice lowered but intense, understand something these Americans never will: the spiritual connection between a man and the soil he cultivates. This industrial farming, it's soulless. Efficient, yes, but without heart. Several prisoners nodded in agreement, clinging to this small consolation. Giuseppe remained silent, mending a tear in his uniform. 3 weeks had passed since his first encounter with the tractors, and work details had taken him to 6 different agricultural operations, each revealing new dimensions of American productivity. Perhaps, ventured Corporal Esposito, a former vineyard worker from Sicily, but their soulless methods feed their people well enough. My brother wrote from Naples before I was captured, said people are digging up public parks to plant potatoes, children foraging for dandelion greens. The barracks fell silent. Home was a painful subject, not just for the separation, but for the growing recognition of disparities that could no longer be ignored. "Did you see those strawberry fields today?" Private Lombardi broke the silence, his voice soft with wonder. "Red as far as you could see. In August? At home, strawberries are gone by June, and even then, only the wealthy enjoy them." "The refrigerated trucks," added another prisoner, "taking them to cities hundreds of miles away, still fresh." Giuseppe finally looked up from his mending. "It's not just the machines or the scale. It's the ordinary nature of it all. Today, I watched a farmer's wife give strawberries to her children as a casual snack. They ate some and left others, without a second thought. In my village, such abundance would be—" "Miraculous," offered Esposito. "It would be treated as miraculous." Captain Ricci's expression darkened. "This talk accomplishes nothing. We are soldiers of Italy, regardless of American plenty." "Are we still soldiers?" The question came from Pietro Russo, a middle-aged reservist from Florence who rarely spoke. "The war continues without us. Italy may have—" "Enough," Ricci cut him off. "Such speculation is forbidden." Later that night, while most slept, Giuseppe found himself in whispered conversation with Russo near the barracks window. Moonlight cast silver patterns across the wooden floor. "I was an economics professor," Russo revealed, surprising Giuseppe, "at the University of Florence, before they replaced academic economics with fascist political economy. I knew, even then." "Knew what?" "The numbers never supported our rhetoric. Italy's agricultural productivity, industrial capacity, military potential, all exaggerated by factors of 5, 10, sometimes 20. I tried publishing actual figures, was visited by men from the Ministry of Popular Culture, suggested I revise my findings or pursue another field of study." Giuseppe absorbed this in silence, connecting it with all he had witnessed in the American heartland. "Today," Russo continued, "I counted 117 tractors across 3 farms, more mechanical power than in my entire province, and this is just one county in one state." A peculiar feeling washed over Giuseppe. Not quite betrayal, but something adjacent to it. A lifetime of certainties dissolved by the simple reality of American cornfields and strawberry patches. "What happens," he whispered, "when we return to Italy? How do we explain what we've seen? Who would believe that America has more tractors than Italy has soldiers?" Russo's laugh held no humor. Who indeed? After years of being told that Americans are soft, decadent, incapable of sacrifice or discipline. Yet here they are, feeding the world with half their workforce overseas. The conversation ended as a guard passed on his rounds, flashlight beams sweeping across sleeping forms. Giuseppe returned to his bunk, but sleep eluded him. The question that had begun with those first tractors had expanded, becoming not just about agricultural machinery or food production, but about the nature of truth itself. How many other certainties would prove similarly hollow once examined in the harsh light of actual experience?
The thought accompanied him into uneasy dreams, where endless parades of tractors marched across Italian piazzas, their metal tracks leaving imprints on ancient cobblestones like the inescapable march of a new reality. Autumn painted the Kentucky countryside in fiery hues of red and gold as Giuseppe sorted apples in the camp's processing shed. The fruit arrived by the truckload, thousands of perfect specimens destined for pies, cider, and shipping overseas. Each apple passed through his hands for inspection before joining the perfectly sorted piles. Even in this abundance, there was methodical order. "In Naples," remarked Antonio Ferrari, working beside him, "my daughter waited 3 hours for oranges last winter. When she finally reached the front, they had only rotten ones left, one per family." Giuseppe nodded, remembering similar scenes in his own village. The contrast with the mountain of apples before them needed no elaboration. The processing shed had become a place of revelation in unexpected ways. Here, amid the sweet fragrance of fruit, prisoners exchanged observations that would have been dangerous in the main barracks, where Captain Ricci and other devoted fascists maintained vigilant ears. The steady rhythm of sorting created a meditative space where truth emerged like the polished skin of each apple after a buffing cloth. "My father," Giuseppe said, selecting a perfect red delicious, wrote that party officials claimed poor harvests were due to Allied bombing. But we haven't seen a single military target near these farms. Not one bomber would be spared for such purposes. "The bombing excuse is convenient," replied Ferrari, "explains every shortage. But I worked in a textile factory before conscription. We were running out of raw materials by 1940, long before any bombs fell. The system was already failing." A nearby guard, half listening while reading a newspaper, flipped a page. The headline was visible, something about new tank production reaching 50,000 units. The number registered like a physical blow. 50,000? The entire Italian armored corps had never exceeded a few hundred operational vehicles. "You know what amazes me most?" said Lorenzo Mancini, an older prisoner who had remained mostly silent until now. "Their waste. Yesterday, I watched a farmer discard an entire tractor engine because repairing it would take longer than replacing it. In my village, we would have salvaged every screw, every wire." Giuseppe had witnessed similar scenes. Abundance so complete it permitted inefficiencies that would be unthinkable in Italy. Damaged equipment replaced rather than repaired. Fields left fallow to prevent price drops. Food thrown away if cosmetically imperfect despite being perfectly edible. "It's not just material wealth," observed Ferrari, lowering his voice. "Have you noticed how the Americans treat us? Not as enemies to be broken, but as laborers to be managed efficiently. Even their contempt is casual, without the bitter hatred we were told to expect." Giuseppe had indeed noticed. The American guards maintained discipline but showed little personal animosity. Some even displayed a kind of detached curiosity about Italy, asking questions about wine regions or ancient ruins. This pragmatic approach extended to every aspect of camp operation, from the methodical distribution of rations to the scheduled recreation periods. Everything operated according to systems rather than emotions. "Their society runs like their machines," Mancini noted. "Standardized parts, interchangeable, replaceable. No wonder they produce so much. Even their prison camps function with industrial efficiency." As if to emphasize his point, the whistle blew with perfect timing, signaling the end of the work shift. The prisoners lined up, counted off, and marched back toward the main camp with the precision of a factory change of shift. That evening, a rare treat awaited, a film screening in the camp's recreation hall. The prisoners filed in, expecting propaganda highlighting American military might. Instead, they found themselves watching The Wizard of Oz, its technicolor world exploding across the screen with impossible vibrancy. Giuseppe sat transfixed,
Even Italian cinema at its finest had never achieved such technical mastery, such seamless fantasy. Around him, hardened soldiers gasped audibly when the film transformed from black and white to color. "They show this to children," whispered Ferrari incredulously. "For entertainment." The technical achievement represented yet another dimension of American capacity. Not just practical production, but the ability to create wonder, to dedicate enormous resources to something as ephemeral as a children's story. What kind of society could spare such effort for pure entertainment while simultaneously outproducing every Axis nation combined in weapons and food? Walking back to the barracks under starlight, Giuseppe found himself struggling with a new emotion beyond shock or envy. It was a profound sense of having been deceived, not just about American capabilities, but about the very nature of national strength. Italy had glorified struggle, sacrifice, the nobility of poverty. Here was a nation that had seemingly transcended such limitations, creating abundance so complete it bordered on the wasteful. "What are you thinking, Giuseppe?" asked Ferrari, noting his silence. "I'm thinking," he replied slowly, "that we've been fighting the wrong war all along. While we glorified the peasant with his hand plow, they built tractors by the thousand. While we romanticized the struggle, they eliminated it. And now we know which approach yields actual power." The words felt treasonous even as they left his lips, but in the darkness, surrounded by the vastness of the American heartland, Giuseppe could no longer deny what his eyes had witnessed. The revolution wasn't in political ideologies or militaristic expansion. It was in the quiet fields where machines had multiplied human capacity beyond anything Mussolini's speeches had ever imagined. How could a nation of noble peasants hope to stand against this tide of mechanical abundance? And more troubling still, why would they even want to? Winter descended on Camp Ellis, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine white canvas. Inside the camp's machine shop, Giuseppe worked alongside American mechanics, repairing farm equipment that would resume operation in spring. The contrast between this facility and any comparable Italian workshop was striking, not just in the abundance of tools and spare parts, but in the systematic approach to maintenance. "This carburetor design," explained Sam Wilson, the civilian foreman, pointing to a disassembled tractor engine, "is standardized across 17 different models. Makes replacement simple, efficient. Same philosophy as our military vehicles, interchangeable parts wherever possible." Giuseppe nodded, absorbing another lesson in American industrial thinking. In the Italian army, vehicles from different manufacturers required unique parts, creating logistical nightmares. Here, standardization allowed for repairs that would be impossible under such constraints. "Before the war," Wilson continued, seemingly oblivious to the strategic information he casually shared, International Harvester alone was producing over 35,000 tractors annually. Now, with military contracts, they've quadrupled capacity. Same factories can switch between tractors and tanks, similar drivetrains, you see. 35,000 from one manufacturer. Quadrupled. The numbers no longer shocked Giuseppe. They simply confirmed what 6 months in America had taught him. The gulf between propaganda and reality had grown so vast that new revelations merely added detail to an already clear picture. During lunch break, the prisoners huddled near the shop's heaters, warming hands around tin cups of coffee. The conversation turned, as it increasingly did, to the impossible task of reconciling what they had witnessed with what they had been taught. "My brother-in-law," said Mancini, "was party secretary for our district. Gave speeches about agricultural self-sufficiency, the noble Italian farmer feeding the nation through his connection to the soil." Meanwhile, bread was already being rationed, and the only full stomachs belonged to officials. "The most devastating weapon America possesses isn't their bombers or battleships," added Ferrari. "It's this." He gestured toward the window, where endless fields lay dormant under snow.
the capacity to produce while we merely subsist. Giuseppe remained silent, turning a wrench in his calloused hands. 6 months earlier, he had been a true believer, not necessarily in fascism's more extreme rhetoric, but in the essential narrative of Italian cultural and agricultural superiority. Now that belief lay as dormant as the winter fields, frozen by reality's unforgiving temperature. A new prisoner had arrived the previous week, an intelligence officer captured during the Allied advance through southern Italy. He brought disturbing news, shared in whispers. Mussolini deposed, Italy divided between German occupation and Allied liberation, former fascists now claiming they had always opposed the regime. The war continued, but Italy's part in it had fractured into civil conflict. "So we sit here," muttered Esposito, "learning American farming techniques while our country tears itself apart." "Perhaps," Giuseppe finally spoke, "what we learn here is more valuable than anything we could contribute there." The statement drew surprised glances. "I don't mean collaboration or betrayal. I mean understanding how we were outmatched from the beginning. Not by American courage or fighting spirit, but by tractors, by refrigerated trucks, by standardized carburetors." That evening, Giuseppe found himself staring at a photograph that had arrived in a rare letter from home. His father stood beside their single mule, his face gaunt but proud, one hand resting on the wooden plow that had served their family for generations. The contrast between this image and the mechanical giants that had become his daily reality in America could not have been more stark or more painful. Would his father understand what he had witnessed? Could any Italian who hadn't seen it with their own eyes truly comprehend the scale of the disparity? The noble peasant, celebrated in fascist imagery, suddenly seemed not heroic but tragic, a figure consigned to unnecessary hardship by leaders who confused poverty with virtue. Giuseppe tucked the photograph away as Captain Ricci approached. The officer's devotion to fascist principles had hardened rather than softened in captivity, as if the harsher reality became, the more desperately he clung to ideology. "Spring planting begins next month," Ricci remarked, his tone deliberately casual. "The Americans will expect increased labor from us." Giuseppe nodded. "They've been training some of us on their equipment. I've been selected for the tractor program." Ricci's expression tightened. "Be careful, Moretti. Learning their methods is one thing, admiring them is another. Remember where your loyalties lie." "My loyalties lie with Italy," replied evenly, "with seeing my family and village prosper after the war. If American methods can help achieve that, why should we reject them?" "Because they come at a price," hissed. "Their machines, their systems, they destroy the very things that make us Italian. The connection to the land, to tradition, to proper hierarchy. They would make us into mechanical men, like themselves." The captain stalked away, leaving Giuseppe to ponder his words. There was truth in them, he acknowledged, a truth that complicated the simple narrative of progress. The American approach offered abundance, but demanded standardization. It promised comfort, but required conformity. The tractors that had so impressed him also flattened the landscape, literally and figuratively, creating a world where efficiency trumped individuality. Yet when he recalled his mother's letters describing empty markets, when he thought of his younger siblings going to bed hungry, Giuseppe found Ricci's romantic traditionalism hollow. What good was cultural uniqueness if it meant perpetual scarcity? What virtue existed in unnecessary hardship? Spring arrived with explosive green vigor across the Kentucky countryside. Giuseppe now spent most days operating a John Deere tractor on a nearby farm, part of an advanced training program for prisoners who showed mechanical aptitude. Under the watchful but increasingly relaxed supervision of guards, he learned to repair engines, adjust hydraulic systems, and operate increasingly complex equipment.
The farm's owner, Harold Jenkins, worked alongside the prisoners, showing a pragmatic interest in their backgrounds. Learning that Giuseppe came from a wine-producing region, he peppered him with questions about viticulture while sharing insights about American farming methods. "Your old man still using a wooden plow, you say?" Jenkins asked during a lunch break, genuinely curious rather than mocking. "Jesus, that's like something out of a history book. No offense." "None taken," Giuseppe replied, having moved beyond defensiveness months ago. "It's what we have, what we've always had." Jenkins shook his head. "After the war, that'll change. Mark my words. Europe will mechanize faster than anyone expects. Too many advantages to ignore." "Perhaps," Giuseppe agreed, though he wondered. Italy's agricultural landscape, small fields terraced into hillsides, ancient groves of olives and vines, wouldn't easily accommodate the massive equipment that roamed American plains.
Geography and history had shaped different paths. "You know," Jenkins continued, biting into a sandwich, "my grandfather fought in the last war. Came back talking about how backward farming was in France. 20 years later, my cousin landed at Normandy. Said the same damn thing. Some places just resist change, I guess." The observation struck Giuseppe as simultaneously insightful and myopic, typical of American perspectives he had encountered. The ease with which Americans embraced change, their confidence in progress, their casual dismissal of tradition, these qualities enabled their extraordinary productivity while blinding them to the value of what they discarded. That evening, Giuseppe was summoned to the camp commander's office, an unusual occurrence that set rumors flying among the prisoners. Major Williams, a career Army officer with a reputation for fairness, sat behind a desk covered with papers.
"Moretti," he began without preamble, "your supervisors speak highly of your work with the farm equipment. Quick learner, good mechanical instincts." "Thank you, sir." Giuseppe stood at attention, unsure where this was leading. "We're expanding our agricultural training program. Need prisoners to teach other prisoners. Basic mechanics, equipment operation, maintenance. Interested?" The offer caught Giuseppe by surprise. To become not just a student of American methods, but a teacher, it represented a deeper level of engagement, almost a form of collaboration. "I would be helping other Italian prisoners learn American farming techniques," he clarified. Williams nodded. "Exactly. War won't last forever. Italy will need men who understand modern agriculture when you all go home. Better for everyone if you're not starting from scratch." The pragmatism was quintessentially American, looking beyond current enmity toward future utility. Even in a prisoner of war camp, efficiency and productivity remained guiding principles. Giuseppe thought of Ricci and his warnings about losing Italian identity, of his father's weathered hands on the ancient wooden plow, of empty markets and hungry children back home. "I would be honored, sir," he replied finally. As he walked back to the barracks, Giuseppe realized he had crossed a threshold. No longer merely witnessing American abundance, he was now actively participating in its methodology, helping to transmit its principles to fellow Italians. The decision felt momentous, though he couldn't yet articulate why. Professor Russo, who had become something of a mentor, summarized it that night as they walked the perimeter fence during the evening exercise period. "You're not just learning their techniques, Giuseppe. You're absorbing their worldview. Efficiency over tradition, standardization over diversity, production over connection." "Is that necessarily wrong?" Giuseppe challenged.
"When tradition means hunger?" "Not wrong," Russo corrected gently, "just different. And differences have consequences. The America we're seeing, this abundance, this mechanization, it's reshaping the world in its image. Not through conquest or ideology, but through tractors and refrigerators and standardized parts. The question isn't whether it works. Clearly it does. The question is what we lose in the process." As the sun set over the endless American fields, Giuseppe considered Russo's words. The tractors that had so impressed him months earlier now seemed not just machines, but carriers of a particular vision, one that promised abundance
while demanding surrender of older ways.
The most profound discovery of his captivity was not the mere existence of American productivity, but the recognition that it represented a competing form of civilization, neither better nor worse than Italy's traditional agricultural society, but fundamentally different in its values, methods, and aspirations. "We were told," he said quietly, "that we were fighting to preserve our way of life against American materialism. But I wonder if we were actually fighting to preserve our poverty against their abundance." Rousseau smiled sadly. Both can be true simultaneously. The tractors bring plenty, but also homogenization. The question for Italy after the war will be whether we can find a middle path, adopting their methods without surrendering our soul. The answer to that question lay in a future beyond barbed wire, in fields not yet planted, in choices not yet made.
For now, Giuseppe could only watch as the last light faded over Kentucky farmland, where mechanical giants slept in barns larger than Italian churches, waiting for morning to resume their relentless transformation of the landscape. The war had brought him here as a prisoner, but in witnessing America's tractors, more numerous than Italy's soldiers, he had discovered a different kind of battle, one fought not with guns, but with competing visions of humanity's relationship to the land, to tradition, and to progress itself. It was a battle that would continue long after the shooting stopped, silent but profound, as the world decided which seeds to plant in the post-war era. Perhaps we all dream of finding balance, Giuseppe thought, between the soulful connection to land that Captain Ricci celebrated and the material abundance that American tractors made possible.
But as history has shown again and again, there are some dreams even the most advanced machines cannot harvest, dreams that grow only in the complex soil of human hearts, nourished by traditions, yet reaching toward futures we can glimpse but never fully grasp until we arrive at their season.